Hello, everyone. Welcome to Security Community Network's webinar, Passover Without Fear. My name is Abigail Miller, and I serve as the program manager for SCN. We would like to thank the Jewish Federations of North America, Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and ADL for sponsoring today's webinar, in which we will cover information on the current environment facing the Jewish community today, as well as best practices and resources for keeping this Passover season as safe, secure, and welcoming as possible. I have a few administrative notes before we get started today. This conversation is being recorded and will be made available following conclusion, in addition to relevant resources and materials identified throughout our conversation. All attendees are off mic and off video. So if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A feature, which is actively monitored by our SCN security professionals. So with that, to get today's conversation started, I will pass it over to Michael Masters, the National Director and CEO of Secure Community Network. Michael.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you to all of our partners. It is my distinct honor to welcome and introduce the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Honorable Christopher Wray. Director?
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate SCN giving me a few minutes to join you all again. In many ways, it feels just like yesterday that we were together the last time in the days after Hamas's horrific attack on Israel. But in that time, the FBI has been hard at work on a whole host of fronts. So I thought today I could spend a few minutes updating you on the threat picture we're seeing and talking a bit about how the FBI continues to be very focused on supporting the Jewish community and keeping really all Americans safe. On our last call on October 12th, we talked about how even before the October 7th attack, the threat to Jewish Americans had already been elevated. That assessment was backed up by, among other things, the fact that as of a year ago, a full 63% of religiously motivated hate crimes in the U.S. were fueled by anti-Semitism. That's almost 2/3 of all religious hate crimes, targeting a group that makes up just 2.4% of our population. And as all of you know far too well, that statistic represents very real violence and very real threats to your institutions, to your houses of worship, to your schools and university organizations, and to the individuals in your communities simply for being who you are. In our last call, we also talked about how in just a few days after the October 7th attack, we'd already seen a rapid uptick in threats against Jewish people in the United States, again, post-October 7th. We were already conducting investigations and interventions as individuals fueled by hate and extremism drew inspiration from events over in the Middle East. And in the 6 months Now, since then, we've seen the threat stay elevated. So to be more specific, between October 7th and January 30th of this year, we opened over 3 times more anti-Jewish hate crime investigations than in the 4 months before October 7th. And of course, that's on top of what was already an increase from the previous year. As I, look back over my career in law enforcement, I'm hard-pressed to think of a time where so many different threats to our public safety and national security were so elevated all at the same time. Today, we at the Bureau remain particularly concerned that lone actors could target large gatherings, high-profile events, or symbolic or religious locations for violence, particularly a concern, of course, as we look to the start of Passover on Monday evening. You should also know that we've seen a marked increase in hoaxes, both bomb and active shooter threats. And I want to be clear, I don't say that in any way to downplay the gravity of those crimes, because when hoaxes target synagogues, Jewish community centers, and other affiliated facilities across the U.S., they not only disrupt whatever activities are ongoing, they also intimidate people and terrorize entire communities, and they stretch local law enforcement resources, straining law enforcement's ability to respond to other threats. So please be assured that we are relentlessly pursuing those individuals who conduct those kinds of threats, hoax threats, as well. In addition to the threats posed by homegrown violent extremists and other lone actors motivated by hate, we've seen since October 7th, a rogues gallery of foreign terrorist organizations call for attacks against the United States and our allies. Al-Qaeda issued its most specific call to attack the U.S. in the past 5 years, as has its affiliate, AQAP, or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. ISIS urged followers to target Jewish communities both in the United States and Europe, something we're increasingly concerned about following the ISIS-K attack we saw at the concert hall in Russia just a few weeks ago. And you got Hezbollah. Hezbollah has publicly expressed its support for Hamas and threatened to attack U.S. interests in the Middle East. And something I know is on all of our minds now, after the last few days in particular, the threat posed by Iran itself is very real. In fact, just over the past few years, Iran has brazenly planned or attempted several assassinations of former U.S. officials, U.S. journalists here on U.S. soil. And the Bureau has been active in flushing out those plots, disrupting them, holding potential perpetrators accountable. A lot of Iran's actions there have been motivated by a desire to retaliate in that instance for the death of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, or for criticism in the case of the journalist. Now, following Iran's direct and brazen attack on Israel over the weekend, and given what I would say is just the sheer volatility and fluidity of the environment abroad, we are urging all of our partners here and around the world to stay vigilant and on the balls of their feet when it comes to potential threats that may emerge from Iran or its proxies, both overseas and even here in the homeland. And as always, we're going to stay closely lashed up with you all to make sure we're all working together to prevent violence against your communities. Now, I do want to be clear, as I think I said back in October, I'm not providing these updates in any way to alarm you, because this is not a time for panic, but it is a time for continued vigilance. And I want you to know that we at the FBI are closely tracking these very real threats that have your communities on edge, and we're actively hitting back at the perpetrators full force. We've got nearly 4,500 agents, state and local task force officers, specifically working counterterrorism out of all 56 FBI field offices. On top of that, as I mentioned on our last call, we elevated civil rights violations, specifically including hate crimes, to a national threat priority 3 years ago. And in plain English, that means the program receives even more resources, and those violations jump a lot of other investigations in priority at every FBI field office. Now, those were things we had already done. This year, we've also increased the number of people specifically committed to investigating civil rights crimes, and our experts on hate crimes are continuously engaging our domestic terrorism experts through a dedicated fusion cell, which we put in place in 2019. And so I want you to rest assured that we have a large force dedicated to combating these threats to the Jewish community. But it's not just those of us at the FBI and those on our task forces. I also want and need to acknowledge that one of our greatest assets in keeping Americans safe is you. We simply cannot do our work without help from the communities we serve. But you don't only show incredible support for our work when we ask for it, you also have us on speed dial when you discover something that we don't have yet. Just last week, SCN provided us a tip that the Weizmann National Museum of American Jewish History had received a threatening letter, and our Philadelphia division immediately sprang into action. We've got the letter in hand and are using every tool at our disposal to track down the individual who mailed the letter and to make sure that the subject can't carry out that violence. So while I said at the outset that I wanted to update you on what we're doing, I also want to thank you for everything you're doing to work with us to keep Jewish communities across the continent safe. So let me just say again, thank you. Please know that the entire Bureau stands with you, and on behalf of the 38,000 men and women of the FBI, I wish you all a safe and happy Passover.
Director, thank you. And one of the questions I am asked most often in these challenging times is whether we as a community can count on law enforcement. To the community, under the leadership of Director Wray and his team, I can state without equivocation or with any uncertainty that we as a community have never had a stronger partner in or partnership with the FBI. The values of the FBI, fidelity, bravery, and integrity, are clear in the actions, understanding, and dedication to our community and our country. To that point, the director is taking time away from a meeting of all the heads of his field offices, all the special agents in the country, to join us today. I want to thank you, Director, for your ongoing and close support to SCN and the Jewish community, for your friendship. It's particularly important and meaningful in this unprecedented threat environment. Your candor and clarity regarding the threats we face, particularly since October 7th and now since Iran's unprecedented attack of April 13th, have been extremely helpful in keeping us not merely informed, but vigilant. The director's leadership and courage in personally communicating this complex threat environment in his public appearances may not be what everyone wants to hear, but it is certainly what everyone needs to know. And I also want to recognize Deputy Director Paul Abate, who I know is listening in with the director. I want to thank him for his close partnership. The Deputy Director always makes himself available when we need him, and we have needed him and the Bureau, as well as all of the 38,000 men and women of the FBI, greatly. The Deputy Director and Director have set a clear leadership tone to the men and women of the Bureau, and our thanks to those 38,000 special agents, analysts, and support staff who are working diligently every day to keep all of us safe from the threats you just described, Director. They're doing all this at a time when Congress recently cut the FBI budget by 6%. At a time when the threats to our country or community have never been greater, our allies and law enforcement are doing even more with less and dedicating more time and effort, as we heard the director speak about, to our community. It's more important now than ever. We heard the analysis on the current threat environment from the director. I'm not going to repeat it. I do want to contextualize it, though, as one of the security professionals working on behalf of our community and as a member of the community who looks forward to gathering with family and loved ones in the days ahead for our Passover holiday. The increased tensions between Iran and Israel come as the Jewish community is facing that complex and dynamic domestic threat landscape. The threat is amplified with the upcoming Passover holiday. This reality requires us to recognize the threat and work to prepare to meet it. From supremacists and Nazis to adherents and sympathizers of Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Hezbollah, Hamas, and of course, Iran, that rogues gallery that the director noted we face. These are diverse ideologies, but united in one thing: their desire to undermine, if not end us, the Jewish people, and whether we are in the state of Israel or the United States. We must recognize that representatives and sympathizers of these groups don't merely exist in faraway lands or offbeat locations. Whether via online pass or by virtue of being here already, they can reach into our country and our communities. We recognize the overseas events and the concern and fear these may cause. Based on what we assess at SCN and with our partners, we continue to urge Jewish institutions here at home to remain open and operational unless they are provided direct, actionable information by law enforcement or public safety partners concerning a specific credible threat to an organization, facility, or location. We are not aware at this time of any direct known threat to the Jewish community or any of our institutions domestically. We can anticipate, as we've seen over the last several months and week, individuals and groups may seek to exploit recent events to push their agendas. This often takes the form of protests and civil unrest, as we saw on Monday across the country, blocking airports and other points of commerce. These activities are at base efforts to shut down American life and Jewish life and dissuade us from living Jewish lives. With strong safety and security measures in place, that doesn't need to happen. We are urging that those in charge of security, community leaders, and all community members maintain the already enhanced safety and security measures many have implemented since October 7th. With those in place, we are not advising that organizations need to take additional steps at this time. But now is a good time to do a number of simple things. One, connect with law enforcement. Organizations should have a designated liaison who is in direct contact with law enforcement prior to and during events. Notify law enforcement immediately of any issues or concerns that arise. Two, connect with your local Jewish security professional. Three, ensure facility lockdown procedures are in place in the event of nearby protests. SCN and our partners are closely tracking calls for protests and other events. Be aware during large gatherings and demonstrations. Individuals who plan to be in close proximity to planned protests or exercise their First Amendment rights of assembly and free speech are advised to be aware of their surroundings and, in the event of disorder or violence, adhere to recommendations from law enforcement. The best way to avoid a confrontation is not to enter one. Fifth, if you see something, say something. Report it to local law enforcement, report it to your local security director, report it to the SCN 24/7 duty desk, from a bomb threat to a protest and from a flyer to a message of hate. We will be sharing resources from SCN and partners, to include the co-sponsors on today's calls and others after the webinar, that covers many of these issues, from preparing for protests to recognizing signs of suspicious activity, and my colleague Brad Orsini, along with the panelists, will go through those shortly. If you need additional assistance, contact your local Jewish security professional. If you're unsure who they are, or if you have one, contact SCN. The information's on our website. Investing in security as individuals, as a community, and a country is the down payment we pay to ensure that Jewish life can not only exist but flourish, free from hate or violence. There are now over 110 communities that are directly covered by professional full-time security initiatives, in addition to SCN's 11 regional directors who cover the entire country. This is in addition to the best backbone at SCN that develops best practice assessments, trainings, and grant guidance that are made available to all communities, all supported by Live Secure, the effort spearheaded by JFNA and supported by SCN and local federations, which is allowing us to expand best practice security across the country. Our Jewish security professionals going into the holiday and every day are working hard to protect our community. Immediately after the strikes in Syria, we activated our Red Cell Task Force, a group of subject matter experts from the intelligence and national security space that have a unique perspective of the Middle East, developed through years of operational experience. We've been coordinating closely with our Israeli partners. Since last Wednesday alone, a week ago, SCN's duty desk has released 6 intelligence products on the current threat environment, and that is in addition to those released by local federations and security initiatives from New York and Boston to Portland and LA. The National Network of Security Professionals convened on Thursday for its weekly national call, and we will convene tomorrow as well to prepare for the upcoming holiday as security professionals. All of us have a role to play in not only addressing anti-Semitism, hate, and threats and violence, but in keeping Jewish life alive in our community. From federations to national partners like Hillel and the Foundation for Jewish Camp, our synagogue movements, and certainly the co-sponsors of today's call, JFNA, the Conference of Presidents, the ADL, and our other security and safety partners across the country like CSS, all of whom are working closely together to keep our shuls, schools, camps, and campuses secure from anti-Semitism, and safe. This call is evidence of the coming together by key partners and organizations. We have to replicate that across the community. Unprecedented threats do not need to equate to unnecessary fear or panic. Rather, let's focus on empowerment and the future of ensuring our families can walk to shul, our kids can go to camp, wearing stars of David around their necks, kippot on their heads, and with mezuzot proudly affixed to our doorposts. This is our choice to make. Let us make it together and for the future. Rest assured that those focused on the safety and security of the community are maintaining a laser-like focus on this so Jewish life can exist and thrive, continuing and enhancing the commitment and work of so many of you who keep our community alive and vibrant. We will continue to do this work together as one community, as one Jewish people. Am Yisrael Chai. Turn it back over to Abby Miller.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, FBI Director Ray. I will pass it over shortly to Carrie Sleeper to introduce our panel. Carrie?
Thank you, Abby. I'm pleased to introduce three distinguished law enforcement partners. They'll be offering a perspective of what they or their communities are doing to protect the Jewish community. The three members will be Ken Corey, former NYPD Chief of Department, Chief Michael Bentalila, the Aventura, Florida Police Chief, and Captain J. Tanner Jansen, the Director of the Statewide Information and Analysis Center in Utah. I'll start off with Ken. I have 4 questions for each of the panelists. We'll start with question number 1, allow each panelist to answer it, and then we'll go on to the second question. Ken, what is your agency doing differently to protect the Jewish community in your AOR based on this heightened threat environment?
Yeah, well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me on. The NYPD has always had a really strong relationship with the Jewish community, the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. But I think what's being done differently here, well, coverage has always been provided to Jewish institutions, around holidays, that coverage takes on a much more serious tone now. In fewer patrol officers out there and more counterterrorism officers deployed with, heavy vests and long guns and things like that. Also, much stronger communication going on with the community in order to really maximize those efforts. Having those officers, at places where when worshipers are traveling to and from service, for example, nobody has officers to waste these days with the shortage of police officers. So we don't want officers standing in front of a closed building or an empty building when we could have them in front of a building that's occupied where they're more needed. So really trying to coordinate that, and that's where the strong communication comes in.
Thank you, Ken. Chief Bentalila, could you offer what you're doing in Ventura, Florida?
Yeah, so we have a very large Jewish population in my city as well, and throughout the years we've always had a very strong relationship with the Jewish community in every aspect, and not just our religious facilities. We have kosher restaurants, kosher markets, so all of these in our eyes are possible targets. So it's not just the religious facilities. After October 7th, there was a lot of concern in our community and requests for service. So I would say the difference, we've doubled our efforts since October 7th. And in my mind, I think we are succeeding because here we have the attack that Iran had on Israel, and the reaction we had after October 7th is not the same reaction that we had. There's concern today, but not the demands that were put upon us, because the community really feels comfortable with what we've been doing. The strong presence at all times, and even more so during holiday sessions, where we have officers just dedicated to going to the religious facilities, getting out, walking, and being seen inside and coming out. And this is beyond who may be hired in an off-duty status, and then monitoring the pathways that our Jewish participants will be walking on, and using our camera system where maybe we were looking at traffic on every given day, but we'll move the cameras. So now we're looking at pedestrian traffic to and from religious facilities. We're monitoring those during the high levels of whether it's Shabbat or upcoming Passover, and really just maintaining strong levels of communication, letting everybody know that we're maintaining relationships with federal and state officials. We're getting the latest intelligence, and really our main concern is, like Director Ray said, is the lone wolf person, and really keeping an eye out for that, because the intelligence isn't there for anything on a larger scale. That's our big concern, and what we're doing to keep that at bay.
Thank you, Chief. Captain Jensen, I know you're responsible for actually statewide intelligence within the state of Utah. So if you could offer it from a statewide perspective of what you're doing.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Carrie, and I'm honored to speak today. And I agree with both the other panelists, the chiefs, that number one, it's about the partnerships. Having that type of communication process with your partners as soon as possible is just so vital. In Utah, every year we house a Houses of Worship symposium where we break bread with our religious leaders and just have that time to sit down, eat, and discuss issues, difficult issues, complex issues, but build friendships and relationships. And that is always the most important thing to do when dealing with the communities. Once the threatened environment came about, especially after October 7th, it became really evident that we had to build a relationship and maintain a relationship in constant communication with our regional security advisor here in Utah. And we were so lucky here that we got our SEN security advisor, I think, like a month before October 7th. So we constantly are staying in communication with Dave McKeon, who sits here in Utah, and just providing constant intel and information back and forth. And that itself really allows us to have that bridge of communication to where if there is a threat, federal partners, local partners, state partners are all communicating, which is what we want. We would hate to find out that information was siloed. We didn't have information. We weren't connecting the dots. So it starts with that partnership, and it's more important now than ever.
Thank you, Captain. And before I ask the next question, I want to put it in perspective for the audience. We have 3 law enforcement professionals here citing best practices, really, as you can hear. These are nuggets of information that community can take back to their AORs and have discussion with their law enforcement professionals as well. So this is very, very helpful information. Ken, next question is, what can or should the Jewish community expect from local law enforcement agencies, particularly when we're dealing with resource constraints, et cetera?
Yeah, so I mean, that gets back to the point about communication and what can they expect? Well, what did you ask for? To a large degree. And I think that particularly in smaller jurisdictions or places that don't have a large Jewish population, the officers there may not be very familiar with the practices of the Jewish faith. So that's when you really need to sit down and explain to them what's going on, the needs that you have. But it's also, an important time to talk about what security arrangements do you have in place. I know many locations are hiring additional security, for the holidays, bigger crowds. And of course, people are fearful, but do your local police know that? Do they know that you're going to have security on the premise? Is that security armed or unarmed? Are they in uniform or not in uniform? Because you don't want a tragedy occurring either, that the police respond to something and police officers are always at a little bit of a disadvantage in those situations, and that everybody knows who the police officer is, but they don't know who the bad guy is. So these are all conversations that you want to have. And that's where you set your expectations. So if I have a conversation with my local police leader, and that should be at the local level, right? That's not necessarily the chief, particularly in a big area. That's going to be whoever your local commander is. And to say, listen, I need some coverage on Friday night and Saturday night, or I need some coverage over the next 8 days for these particular hours, would be ideal if we could have officers there when people are traveling to and from and while services are taking place. I think that anybody can provide that for a short period of time. Any agency, even with the staffing challenges, can really meet those needs over a short period of time, as long as you help them, again, maximize them, and that they're not kind of squandering resources where they're not needed.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Chief Bentolulia, can you describe the discussions you have with community leadership to be able to meet reasonable expectations of providing security versus their expectations?
Yeah, this is a constant year-round effort. And we've been doing this for as long as I can remember, and I've been here since '97. And our Jewish community has grown exponentially since then. So like the chief said, the connections, the communication that we have, the constant adapting to the new environment and the new information that we're getting. But more importantly, I get them to understand that the majority of my officers, they're not Jewish. They don't understand the long history of what's brought us to this point and where we're going. So how do you teach, so many thousands of years of history in a 15-minute roll call? It's very hard to do. So I make sure that the Jewish community here knows that our officers, even though they may not be Jewish, they are being told a little bit about the history, not to choose a side or anything along those lines, but basically the facts of, why this is happening, where we're at, so they can understand the fear and the uneasiness that the community has and the reasons behind it. And it does make the officers feel more understanding about why they're being asked certain things or why they're being told to do certain things. So the communication is not only out to the community, but also to the officers as well. And that just makes for a smoother a relationship with everybody involved.
Thank you, Chief. Captain Jensen, from a statewide perspective, how do you manage that?
Yeah, great question. I think it's important to note that when looking at safety for our communities, there is not one single silver bullet to fix everything. And security, site security, and having officers nearby is one piece of a great big puzzle for safety. And so I think you can expect from law enforcement to plan not just on security, but on prevention, intervention, response, recovery efforts. All of those are important. When you're talking about intervention, what kind of information are you giving your communities to where if they see something, they can say something? And I'm not just talking about direct threats. I'm talking about suspicious behavior, characteristics, something like leakage, warning behavior, where somebody's explaining to a friend that something's going to happen. Paying attention to those details and having officers and multidisciplinary teams intervene and stop those individuals is gonna be a great impact on the safety for our communities. Response planning with officers and law enforcement, and making sure you have good protocols in place for security lockdowns and lock in place. That's another great thing to do. Also, when you're looking at security, there's grants. Department of Homeland Security has great grant opportunities for individuals to apply for, specifically non-profit security grant programs, NSGP, that are available. And I would encourage any of our communities to apply for those and enhance their own security posture. So there's several ways, and I think prevention, intervention, response, recovery should all be considered when looking at working with law enforcement in your communities.
Thank you, Captain. Third question, gentlemen. What can you identify as a best practice that ensures effective collaboration between law enforcement and the community before a crisis? And I know you've already brought these issues up in themes, but can you identify a best practice that any community could use to ensure better, more effective collaboration between the community and law enforcement? Ken, I'll let you have a first stab at that, please.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked a lot about, the need for great communication and relationship building. And, it was important that Noah finished the ark before it started to rain. right? And that's really what needs to be done here. If you don't have those relationships right now with your local, with the officers in your local precinct district, police department, you really need to do that. And I understand that that's not going to happen in the next 5 days. But this is really longer term thinking, right? You need to have those strong relationships. You need to have the open lines of communication. Also, the community needs to take responsibility for their own safety. And this is true in any community, right? Public safety is a shared responsibility. Police can't be everywhere, and again, with diminished headcount. So training opportunities also help empower a community. And the community is less fearful when they kind of know what to do. So whether that's active shooter training, whether that's training to stop the bleed, in the event that something bad happens. A best practice for me in these types of scenarios was always inviting your local officers in at an appropriate time, obviously not in the middle of service, but at an appropriate time to tour your facilities, whatever they may be. Many of the officers have never been in there, yet when you call 911 for help, do you really want them wasting precious seconds trying to figure out where they go? How do I get in here? Where is this room? And that doesn't have to be a worst case. That could just be something like a medical emergency, right? Somebody who's suffering a heart attack, and they're coming to help. So when seconds count, you really want them there. And then I think is another best practice is really, you want to keep the problem outside your door. Don't let it in. And that's what we see over and over again in these types of situations. This is, the offender of this event was allowed in the front door. So we're talking to a group yesterday. I said, if I show up at your synagogue, you should not let me in. Not because I look like a bad guy, but because you don't know me. You've never seen, no one there has ever seen me there before. I'm not familiar with the building. I'm clearly not familiar with the practices, of the faith around this particular holiday, at least as to what goes on inside a synagogue. So why am I there? Right? That should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, and you should try to keep me outside the door. And that's that suspicious person that the captain was talking about that warrants further investigation by the police.
Thank you, Ken. Chief, ideas on best practices you've utilized to connect with the community on and ensure long-term collaboration?
Yeah, so we make sure that when we're all talking about communication, we have one line of communication that they all know is trusted with the police department, because obviously with social media, everybody's on WhatsApp and they all have their own talk groups and they get stuff from social media. We made it very clear to all of our partners that any information that they are looking for we give them the exact location, it comes from us, and that nothing else should be trusted until they hear from us directly. So that's one thing. The other thing that we've done too is when one of our facilities, whether it's a religious facility or a religious business, has an incident, we have a notification system for all of them. So the same way back in the old day, if you got a call for the bank robbery, right? If everybody ran to that one bank, well, the bank robber was really at the other bank at the other side of the city, and that's what they were looking for. So when we send resources to one area that's calling us for an incident, we let all the other areas know that we're having an incident and that they should take their level of security uptick it to the next level, and be prepared, because this may be a ruse, and they understand that. So we work really closely with a citywide plan, pretty much, when we have an incident, that everybody is aware of it, that security level goes up citywide for all of us until we're able to get more information, push that out to everybody, and we can bring things back down to normal once we have them under control, whether it's a real event or a hoax.
Thank you, Chief. Captain, I want to ask you the same questions, best collaborative efforts, and looking at it from a statewide perspective. You have a larger challenge there of a number of communities and agencies you're servicing.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned this earlier, but I think having a regularly scheduled opportunity to sit down and break bread with your communities is so important. Make sure that that's either quarterly or annually. Also, opportunities for interfaith roundtables, things of that nature would be great. And I also do want to highlight that I think it's important for each community, each congregation or location to consider having some type of team, a safety team, a security team, where they sit down and they talk about, okay, if this threat comes in, or whatever we're concerned about, how are we going to look at that, and how are we going to communicate that to law enforcement and come up with a game plan? I'm venturing to guess that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals that are taking these threats within their congregations, and all of that pressure to deal with it is just resting solely on their shoulders, and they feel like it's very difficult, and there's decision fatigue associated with it. So creating a team within your communities where you sit and you discuss what kind of information is coming in, and have a support system, and more importantly, a process of how you're going to collaborate with law enforcement with those threats, will go a long way, because the local agency, law enforcement, will be able to absorb those and understand those, because the communication will be consistent, and you'll get a good relationship on how that's being communicated.
Thank you, Captain. One last question. We're running short on time here, but one particular threat that's impacted the community significantly in the last year have been swattings and bomb threats. Interested in how each of you have established processes or protocols to deal with those. Ken, please.
Yeah. So, generally in any type of call like that, what our response is two-man police cars, and a supervisor as the initial response. And then the first unit on the scene has the obligation of very, very quickly notify everybody else, because other assets are rolling. We can't stop that. That's the nature of police officers. They want to help, right? So if somebody calls and said there's an active shooter in a house of worship or in a school or something like that, I couldn't stop the cops from going if I wanted to. Right. So really the stress is on immediately getting there, assessing the situation. Hey, nothing looks like it's going on here. Everybody slow down. We also try to triage it a little bit with the dispatcher, even as the officers are en route, just finding out how many calls do we have on this. Right. So if I have a crowded place and somebody is alleging that there's an active shooter going on, and I have a single 911 call, my officers are sharp enough to recognize that there's a good chance that this is a bogus call, and they're still going to go, and they're going to go hard. But they're going to be a little more measured, I think, in their approach.
Thank you, Ken. Chief, from a smaller agency perspective, can you offer how you've tried to manage the responses or community expectations on swattings and bomb threats?
Well, we've had them as well. There's the bad guy, I'll use that term, has a sense of safety from behind their keyboard to do this rather than being in person. And like the chief had said, it's how the response is. When we're getting, we have our own 911 center. If we get a call and it's just one call, it's odd, because if it is a hot call, you're expecting multiple calls flooding the 911 center. So we're looking at everything, the entire approach. And sometimes, a measured approach is important as well, because just if the way we respond could wreak more havoc just by our presence and how we're responding. So, we've learned over the years, based on what we're receiving is how we deliver. We obviously check all of them out, make sure everything is safe, but our level of urgency moves up and down the scale based on what we're seeing, and the information that we're getting from the initial calls, how many of them, where they're coming from, how they're being delivered. And we're getting smarter in regards to these anonymous swatting calls, and realizing that a lot of the time they're doing it, one, to waste our resources, or two, to see how we approach in a situation to learn from it. So we take all of this into consideration, and have learned to temper our response, but still be very effective in doing so.
Thank you, Chief. And finally, Captain Tanner, from a statewide perspective.
Yeah, I think training is important with these hoax calls, because I'm seeing a lot of times communities are doing some type of lockout, some type of security drill, and so I think training on those drills is important, because there is going to be a response, and each organization is going to figure out what type of protocol they're going to implement. But I think training, and not only training on what you're going to do in those circumstances, it's so important to not traumatize during those trainings. these hoax calls will happen, and law enforcement's going to respond to make sure it's safe. That doesn't mean we have to traumatize the individuals that are involved with that. So finding a way to normalize those trainings, much like we do with fire drills, or even if you're on an airplane and you're doing a security briefing, you go through those trainings or briefings, and it's not based off of fear, but it's based off of the process and sticking with that. I think that's so important. From an intel perspective, I'm most worried about the hoax threats and the white noise it creates. An immense amount throughout the country of hoax and swatting incidents. Eventually, my worry is that it leads to somebody not worrying about something that's suspicious activity that maybe isn't that direct threat, that's not that bomb threat, 911 call. But they're so busy dealing with those that they don't pay attention to those little details, those behaviors and characteristics that we see within our communities that are concerning. So you've got to stay focused on that.
Thank you, Captain. I want to thank our three distinguished panelists, Chief Corey, Chief Bentalila, Captain Jensen. You clearly have articulated a number of best practices that can be replicated all across this country. So for the X number of thousands of people that are on this call today, take their advice to heart. Consider the key points that they have identified and leverage them in your community. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much. Outstanding job. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brad Orsini, SCN Senior National Security Advisor, who's going to be going an overview of security guidance. Brad?
Gary, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. It's an honor and privilege to serve our community as a Senior National Security Advisor for SCN. During this portion, our guidance presentation and panel, we will discuss practical safety and security advice for the community, given the increased threat posture since the start of the war on October 7th. In a moment, I'll share my screen and go through some of the guidance documents very shortly. However, our guidance and the panel presentation will focus on answering 3 questions for the community. Actually, 4 questions, I apologize. We've been getting questions left and right, and what we really wanted to do is give you the answers, tell you where we're going with how we view safety and security given the threat posture. So that very first question that we're going to answer for you today is, what is a real threat, and how can our community members and organizational leaders assess these threats, whether online, in person, or on the telephone? Simply put, what should our community or our community members do when they receive a threat? We're going to go through a threat matrix and give you a little guidance on that. Question number 2, should we stay open and continue programming, especially in our outside spaces during this heightened threat level? Number 3, if our community learns of a planned protest demonstration scheduled during a publicized event, should we still have the event or cancel it? And then our final question that we're going to ask is one we get every single day. How much information do we put out there, whether it's on our website, whether it's on social media, when we're sharing details of an event? How should we curtail that information and really, albeit institutional buildings, organizations, or persons, we're going to, without reservations, Stephanie Viegas is
Hello, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us through some technical difficulties. We'll have Brad Orsini join us again as he handles those. In the meantime, while those get resolved, I will pass it over to Stephanie Villegas while we discuss our resources and just give a brief overview before moving into our panel. Stephanie?
Absolutely. If you want to go ahead and go to the next page. Welcome, everyone.
Okay.
So some of the things we're going to talk about today is kind of what's crucial, really a component in threat management. And I think people's ability to assess what risk level they're at when they get some type of a communicated threat, whether it's in person, whether it's on the phone. So we're going to talk through this checklist that we came up with in a matrix that we have that's really a simple, if you will, piece of paper. The next page, please, Abby. A simple sheet that you can go down, leave at your desk, put at reception, and it really helps you go through. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail to this resource that we can start using. And then the next resource that we're going to talk about is swatting. And we're going to get into some detail with one of our panelists on providing some practical advice and really coordinating and working with law enforcement and really all of our first responders, some things that you should know, what swatting is, and then really how to mitigate it as it's becoming such a larger threat as is doxing as well. Thank you, Abby. Next page. And then we have a guide out. And all of these are online. They're free resources for you to use, simply going to the SCN website, and you can download any of these. But we want to talk a lot about working with law enforcement. You know, why are those relationships important? Where do we start? Sometimes it's hard to figure out, do I go to my local police department? Do I go to state? Do I go to FBI? How do I incorporate all of them into that and really maintain ongoing activities, both at facilities and within your organizations? And just like the chief and the captain spoke about, how do I maintain that when I have an event, and how do I coordinate those things? And a lot of times, I know right now, resources, there's strapped resources, and how do I navigate around those as well? Abby, you want to go to the next one? And then our top 10 list to secure your facility. Again, there's a top 10 list that we use. We're only going to cover a couple of these today just based on our time constraints, but we will go through these. This is a simple guide that you can use immediately and help get started, even as simple as starting a security committee. And how do I start that? Next slide, Ab. And then low cost, no cost security. What does it mean? What does it entail? And what are maybe some things I can employ right away that are not going to cost me a lot of money or will be a low cost to my facility that I could start and implement immediately? And the next slide might be the last one. No, civil unrest, right? So maybe some real life situations we're going to look at and discussing, you know, whether to stay open and not cancel special events. And then how do we deal with events that have protesters? So some do's and don'ts that we really want to share with you all, both physical security, overall operational procedures, and then any protest preparations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We have Brad back on, so I'll pass it over to you to introduce our panel.
Yes, I apologize, everybody. For the first time ever, I got kicked out of our own Zoom, and I apologize for that. And I know Stephanie picked up. I apologize for that. I'm back on. Let's pull up our panel right now. Stephanie, please stay on. Stephanie's our Deputy Senior National Security Advisor. Next, we have Jessica Anderson, who is our Community Security Director from Portland, Oregon. Sean Brokos, who's our Security Director for the Pittsburgh Jewish Federation Act community. And we're fortunate to have George Salim from the ADL, who serves as the Chief of Staff and Senior Vice President for the ADL. So we will get right into it. I don't know where I got lost, Stephanie, but we are really here to answer the 4 questions of really keeping our community open. And with that, let's go to the very first question for you, Stephanie. We heard from the Director Ray about the threat to the community. Our community feels that. Can you please discuss the methods organizations can use to assess the threat and collect information that may aid law enforcement?
Absolutely. So while you were offline, I did go through a little bit of that, basically stating we know this is a crucial component of any threat management, right? And because most threats prove to be false, I really believe a decision maker needs to be able to determine how seriously the threat should be taken. And I don't think this is always easy to do. So this is why SCN created what we call this threat matrix, as well as a threat checklist. So the matrix is broken down by the type of threat. So is it a high-level direct threat that appears to pose maybe an imminent or serious danger? Is it a medium-level condition threat? That would be one that may be carried out, however, maybe doesn't seem to be entirely realistic. Or is it a low-level veiled threat? And that's one that maybe possesses maybe minimal risk to persons and property. So for some, that's not always easy to assess. So our matrix sheet actually provides examples of these types of threats to help with that decision-making process. It's designed for anyone to follow and really be able to act quickly, remain calm, and be able to obtain information by going through this easy-to-follow checklist. I do want to stress, though, that all information regarding the incident needs to be reported to local law enforcement. If a suspicious item is discovered or a threat level is elevated, it should always be treated as an emergency by contacting 911. So, because threats may be received by phone, by email, by social media, in person, or even by vandalism or graffiti, there are separate checklists for each one of those. So I think we only showed you one example through the slide deck, but there's one for each different threat, if you will. And it's a self-guided list of questions, and it's going to ask for certain things, as well as things to do and things not to do, such as don't hang up on a caller or place a caller on hold, for example. So I encourage everyone to become familiar with the checklist, use it to train on. I really would rather see people use this in a no-fault scenario, become familiar with it. Then the first time is when maybe you're in real life situation, you're not as anxious, you're not as upset, and you have some muscle memory to fall back on. It should be kept readily accessible, place it next to your phone. And lastly, the information provided in this checklist will assist local law enforcement in assessing the threat. They'll assess its validity and potentially assist in any ongoing investigation. Excuse me. Now I'm having throat problems. Brad, back to you.
Stephanie, thank you very much. And that guide will be sent out tomorrow. And Stephanie hit the nail on the head. Use it at your organizational level. Use it for your folks to check people and your access controls. But quite honestly, it is a great checklist. We've all seen the bomb threat checklist. We went through all our communicated threats and put a great guide together. So with that, we know working with law enforcement is so important. We have put the guide, a community guide on working with law enforcement together. Jessica, let me come right to you. Can you provide some practical advice on coordinating and working with law enforcement and all first responders?
Sure. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, relationships with law enforcement for our communities is an absolute must. We just had a great panel talk about a lot of the elements that I'll speak on as well. They should be at the top of your list. And if you are in a community that's small or more remote and you don't have this relationship in place yet, make that your number one priority. These relationships do everything from making the response from law enforcement or fire or EMS both better and quicker. As they get to know you and your community, they're going to learn more about you. They're going to learn more about your spaces. They're also going to really come to an appreciation for the variety that we have within our community. The Jewish community, as we know, has a lot of nuance to it, a lot of group differences, and relationship development with law enforcement and our first responders is a key part of having them know that about us. Engagement with us also lets them better understand both the threats to our community, but how the how the threats affect us, how our community perceives, and how the threats can impact us in ways that they might not understand, being potentially outside of the Jewish community. Here in Portland, the Portland Police Bureau recently sent its primary bias crimes investigator to an ADL conference, and he came away with fresh ideas about his role and how he can help combat anti-Semitism and investigate bias crimes, and also just a deepened interest in developing and engaging with us in new ways. We want that kind of approach for every community. Different law enforcement agencies are going to have different functions and roles, and by having those relationships, you'll come to understand that a little better. It's important to understand that they will have different policies and practices. There will be a range of awareness about Jewish life, and developing each of those relationships will improve that. It's also really rewarding to develop relationships with people for whom community engagement is such an important part. There are law enforcement officers out there who really thrive on that kind of engagement, and you want to be finding those people that are responsive and are interested in learning more. A lot of this falls on us. As a community, we should never presume that law enforcement has that understanding that I've just talked about. It is our responsibility to establish those relationships and to keep them informed. Police are pulled in a lot of different directions. They have a lot of different groups to engage with. And so we need to be the ones who are responsible for making sure that they are kept informed about our events and our understanding of our holidays and which ones are the most important ones and where we really need them to focus their attention. Depending on your geographical location, you may have state or local police show up. You may have a sheriff's office. You may have like a special force like a campus police. You want to be able to know who is going to show up in your community and develop those relationships. The FBI will probably be on scene if an incident is called in, but they're going to have a different role than the primary police. Knowing who these people are ahead of time, having built relationships ahead of time, will make incident response so much easier. It'll be an old friend showing up when you call them instead of someone that you're having to meet for the first time in that incident. Law enforcement partners are most effective when they have the information they need to help make them decisions. Let them know when you're having large community events. Let them know what your security plan is going to be, particularly the big ones that are going to have armed security. They will feel much more comfortable showing up to an event or an incident, knowing a little bit about what is going on. Keeping them up to date on community issues and threats is another element of why reporting is so important. Make sure you're reporting these incidents, emails, everything. This should go to the SCN duty desk. We have a reporting system that's either directly to your duty desk if you don't have a security director in your community, or through your community security director. In Portland, I know that everything that I tell to our bias crimes detective is going straight to the police chief. That's how committed they are to understanding what is happening in the bias crimes area within their community. Lastly, one of the most important things I think is appointing a liaison to law enforcement, a point of contact that is going to be a consistent person between the facility or the community and fire, be it EMS or the police. This helps really develop that relationship, foster it, and it also keeps things simpler for the police, who won't have to keep track of maybe 25 different people or 10 different people. They're really developing individual relationships. Successful partnerships, they're all about developing that relationship, developing consistent and clear communication. It's also appropriate, like, what are the appropriate expectations? When are they going to show up? What are they going to show up for? How can we help them discern the most important elements of our community, the most important events going on in our community? And the trust that comes with that will happen over time. All of these things together, they lead to a Jewish community that feels safer and has more confidence in its first responders.
Jessica, thank you very much. And I'm looking at Stephanie and Sean and you. It's three retired FBI agents that served the community, Portland, Pittsburgh, Stephanie prior to coming to us, Miami. one great aspect, and please correct me where I'm wrong, the better your organization has these contacts with law enforcement. We see this. We also get, what's the collateral best practice that we receive, right? Sometimes we get free resources. Sometimes we get extra drive-bys. Sometimes we get more attention paid to our community when we foster those great relationships. So you're right on point. Thank you very much, Jessica. Sean, let's go to you. Pittsburgh is so unique with the vast amount of swatting incidents, bomb threats, and some unique bomb threats that you've seen since October 7th. What should the community know about these threats, and what is the guidance you're providing to the community right now?
Good afternoon. Thanks, Brad. Good afternoon, everybody. And you hit the nail on the head. We are jumping, we're hopping here in Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, we've seen not just swatting incidents, we've seen hoax bomb threats. So I'll speak to both, but let me start with swatting, because a lot of times we talk about swatting. That's, for us in law enforcement, it's a very familiar term. But for the general public, maybe they haven't heard that. So swatting, just to back up a bit, it's the act of making a fake 911 call with the goal of triggering a dynamic, responsive law enforcement event, unbeknownst to the location. So you might be sitting, whether it's in a school or in your shul, synagogue, community organization, and all of a sudden you see an influx of law enforcement making a dynamic entry, often SWAT officers. And you may have no idea what's going on. That means that a call has been placed to 911, often disguised, whether it's come through voice over internet protocol or some sort of other tools to anonymize the caller. But they will come in through 911. There is going to be a dynamic law enforcement response because they do not know that this is a swatting incident. And they're intentionally designed to be disruptive, to terrorize people. And we have seen our community here and communities across the country have to deal with these. So, and just like Director Ray said, these actors are doing this to intentionally scare or intimidate our organization. So we've worked with law enforcement, certainly on how to respond, but most importantly, our organizations. Our organizations have to understand what these are. And the most important thing is, if you see that law enforcement response, follow the commands of law enforcement. I think it was Mr. Corey who said, law enforcement cannot distinguish immediately good guy versus bad guy. They can't see our halos, so they don't know. They've been called to an incident where they have been told there is an active shooter. So make sure that everybody in your organization, if this does happen, they know to comply with law enforcement. They can certainly share that we don't think a call has been placed from our organization, but law enforcement is going to clear the premises nonetheless. So that leads me to my second point. Make sure you have somebody present at your organization that can lead law enforcement through locked spaces, locked doors. We've had incidents here where law enforcement could not get in, and it creates a really difficult situation. So make sure you have that designated person or persons who have keys, key fobs, swipe cards, whatever you use, that they can get law enforcement to every nook and cranny of your building, because they are still going to clear it. The third thing I want to mention regarding swatting is we have done after action reviews on these. These are traumatic. You are going to have staff, congregants, students have, in many instances, have a gun pointed at you while law enforcement is trying to figure out what's happening. We hear all the time how difficult that was. We all are very pleased to hear that it was not a credible incident, and we breathe that sigh of relief, but a day or two or days later, that's where it really impacts those who were inside that building. So as the head of your organization, make sure you follow up, maybe do a debrief, maybe bring in law enforcement to speak, or some community professionals, mental health professionals. It's a lot to try and work through. They are fast and they are dynamic. So that's swatting. I want to shift gears and talk about, let me back up to swatting though. From a law enforcement perspective, when those calls go in, they can't ascertain that it's a swatting incident, but in most cases, it's one single 911 call. So if you think about it, in a real active shooter situation, and we've certainly seen that here in Pittsburgh with the synagogue shooter, there are many frequent calls to 911. So from a law enforcement perspective, that's a bit of a clue. Nonetheless, they're still coming. It is still a dynamic response. So shifting now to hoax bomb threats, which we are now up to number 7 in our Pittsburgh Jewish community since last Thursday. These two, like swatting, are designed to instill fear or terror in the folks who are receiving them, the organizations receiving them. The ones we've seen lately are definitely anti-Semitic and increasingly graphic. So not only are they disturbing to get to read, but then it's that calculated risk. What am I doing? So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for our organizations to discern what to do. First things first, you should have somebody at your organization who really scours all of your different emails, your contact forms. Sometimes these come in and our folks don't know for 2 or 3 days later. Make sure you have that person designated to really be following your social media. 2, if a bomb threat comes in, share it immediately with your security director through SCN or whoever that person may be, a regional security director. I know there's going to be a list sent out. If you don't have that person, if you don't know who that is, make sure you find it. And this is critical. You can email that hoax threat to that appropriate security director, and they are going to be able to ascertain very quickly if this is hoax language we're seeing across the country. We have seen many in our Pittsburgh area that have had similar language. The recent ones we've seen did not. So that's a very different type of reaction. So while you're doing that, you're also contacting 911. You want to make sure that police are aware of it. You are going to maybe be able to share with 911 that I understand this could be a hoax because it's similar language to other ones we've seen. If you don't know, that's fine too, but make sure to contact 911. Each law enforcement agency is going to respond a little bit differently, but regardless, they're going to send officers. In some cases, they'll send canines. Their job is to just make sure the premises is clear. You are then going to take that hoax language provided to law enforcement, as well as any other information you have relative to that threat, the header information, whatever you can find. Share it with law enforcement for further investigation. The other tool we encourage our folks to do here is look at your video footage. If that bomb threat came in at 3:01 a.m., look back at your video footage. Was somebody in or around your building at that time? But it's up to ultimately the executive director, the head of the organization, to then make the call. Are we evacuating or not? That is a very singular determination. What is your acceptable level of risk? We in Pittsburgh will provide guidance on what to do, but at the end of the day, it still really falls to the head of that organization to make that risk analysis and decide how to move forward. Brad, that's all I have on that.
Sean, thank you very much. Very informative. George, let's go to you in the ADL. Since October 7th, I think both of our organizations have been lockstep about messaging. Can you talk about what the ADL is doing with the community and how you're focusing on helping keep that community open as well, sir?
Sure. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate the opportunity to join this panel. I appreciate the opportunity to continue to join in partnership with SCN and federations and other institutions across the country on a range of elements that are really key to safety and security for all the constituencies that we serve across the country. I think I really want to focus, Brad, on 3 particular points when it comes to the messaging and when it comes to the engagement that we collectively are working on, and I know a lot of the constituents on this call are working on. In terms of putting this all in context, just yesterday, ADL released our annual study of anti-Semitic incidents across the United States. Many folks on this call probably saw it already, but to put it in context, it was the highest recorded year in the history of us collecting the audit, just under 9,000 anti-Semitic incidents across the country. So I appreciate the comments from Sean and from Jessica in terms of kind of what they're seeing in Pittsburgh or other pockets across the United States. What Sean described, what she's seeing with doxing and swatting and other incidents happening in Pittsburgh, and what you all are experiencing across the country, that elevate that tenfold to what we're seeing on a national level. And so as we continue to talk about the really important theme that Captain Tanner Jensen mentioned in the previous panel with Carrie Sleeper, this theme of law enforcement partnerships. As we continue to partner with law enforcement, it's really important to put what's happening in your specific geographic area in context, but also zooming out, there's a broader set of patterns and trends that we're seeing across the country. And at a national level, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are kind of skyrocketing in cities and states across the country. And as we're engaging with partnerships, as we're developing that law enforcement relationship, either continuing it or initiating it for the first time in a city or in a municipality, it's really important, I think, to start not just with what's happening in a city or in a municipality, but also putting it in a broader context. And Brad, to put your comment, to put your question into context here, the messaging between ADL and SCN is to be very clear and focused on what the threat is and how we collectively are viewing it, but also, Brad, to the point that you just mentioned, which is making sure that we are having a collective message as that institutions, unless otherwise noted or mentioned, are going to remain opened, but with the level of vigilance and deterrence that has been mentioned by many of the experts here on the call. I'll pause there.
George, nicely put. Thank you very much. Please stay with us because we're going to give you the final word right at the end, sir. So what we'd like to do now, and I'm going to ask Jessica, Sean, and Stephanie to do something very hard. I got 5 questions left. Could you answer them in 2 minutes or less? We want to make sure we give the community as much information as possible. So I'll start with you, Stephanie. Can you provide a high-level overview of the guidance to be deployed at our institutions? Really that top 10 list. What are we focusing on at a high level?
So we're really focused on, if I have to narrow it down to really 3 things here, right? The threat and vulnerability assessment, reporting, and utilizing technology. So look, every community has unique concerns and challenges, especially when we think about security. I always say, we don't know what we don't know. So you need that security strategy. You need that threat assessment. You need to understand where your strengths are, but more importantly, where your weaknesses are, and then address those. Things like, it might address access control. I remind people all the time, a locked door was the only thing that stopped the gunman in Hell, Germany from attacking congregants in that synagogue. So access control may be one of the bigger reasons that security fails, right? Take that risk-based approach and employ your technology. You may realize that you don't need to employ a team of armed guards, and you can simply get a card reader and maybe do monitoring surveillance cameras, and that will do. But when we do talk about technology, regardless of how simple or complex it is, you need to test it. Make sure it works and test it regularly. And then you need to train on it so it becomes muscle memory and people don't freeze in crisis. Then, maybe you need also to control and kind of communicate your needs to the vendors, right? And I think we skip that part. We don't typically say and make sure that the people we're buying technology from understand the risks and the things that we need to have in place. Look, security is a nitty-gritty business. Security plans need to be practiced regularly if they're going to be effective. And the last thing I want to say is no matter how sophisticated or non you are, there are best practices that can be applied across the board. Reporting. I don't need to go over the importance of reporting. I think Jessica went into that a lot. I think it's important to note that as individuals, we need to cultivate the habit of security consciousness, and we need to be responsible for our security. And how do we report it? Last year, SCN saw this big need and really implemented and rolled out this standardized incident reporting form. It's an online form the public can use to report, and it ensures a coordinated best practice approach. So lastly, if anyone is planning or hosting a Jewish themed event, we encourage you to coordinate with your local community, your security director, right? And then we can enter that into our database, assess the risk based on how many people you're expecting, any pre-event, maybe negative chatter that we're seeing, or any other factors, including look at cybersecurity to mitigate the threats of attacks, and we'll coordinate with law enforcement if it's warranted. So security programs should have all have the same components, right? And I think what we have to remember here is we are in the people business. So we need to figure out how do we balance being open and welcoming while remaining safe. Back to you, Brad.
Stephanie, thank you. Sean, I'm going to go right to you. Many of our organizations has limited funds. Can you provide a few low-cost, no-cost measures that they can deploy right now?
You got it. And I will be brief because this document, and I'm old school, so I still do paper, but I know SCM will put the link in there. This is my absolute favorite document. It is a quick and easy guide to help any organization be better prepared. Take time to review it. It goes into different categories, and I'll touch on some of them briefly. But this should not fall to the head of the organization. This should be a team effort. Appoint a committee, whether you have a security background or not. You have lay leaders, volunteers, an ad hoc committee, whatever the case may be. But print this document, go through it, because there's a checklist. And I'm just going to give you a few examples, right? Securing the property. How do you look at the perimeter of your property? And Stephanie just mentioned locked doors. You've got the perimeter. Are your doors locked? We just had an individual try to get into one of our synagogues last Sunday morning. He's since been charged with ethnic intimidation, but he could not get in. We have video of him trying the doors, could not get in. So look at your perimeter. What are your access control points? This is another one, controlling the flow. Many of our locations have multiple doors. Since October 7th here in Pittsburgh, we've gone to one way in, multiple ways out, but one entrance point. I know it's inconvenient for so many people, but to be able to see who's coming in, having one door makes it so much easier. Signage, that's another one I want to point out. We learned that lesson again after the synagogue shooting. The building where it happened did not have signage yet in place on, not the name of the building, but I'm talking about what door, what stairwell, where's the emergency exits. That was in process. It hadn't yet happened. Make sure that you look at your location and make sure that you have good signage, not just for your congregants or staff, but imagine EMS trying to get in and swiftly get to a certain location in that building. So there's many areas, but please take a minute, print this out, go through the checklist with several people, because that will really help inform where you go. One of the areas, and I know we've mentioned it many times, but this is critical, share it with law enforcement, first responders, establish those relationships. And I just have a quick anecdote. We had one of our organizations say to us, well, the police have never stopped by. That may be very true, but it is up to our organizations to reach out to law enforcement, invite them over, have coffee, have donuts, and please let them walk through your facility. There's not a law enforcement officer out there, EMS fire, who is going to turn that off or down. So make sure you're making those connections.
John, thank you very much. Jessica, let's go right to you. Many of our organizations are just struggling with disruptions at their event due to protests and demonstrators. Can you provide some guidance on how we can proactively prepare for potential civil unrest, and then how we reactively respond if we do have it?
Sure. We've got a civil unrest guidance sheet, and that you'll get the link, you'll get the email to that. So I won't go over any specifics on that. You can read that. It touches on sort of 4 different areas to contemplate. The first is physical security. Again, know your property. If you have an event coming up and you're anticipating protesters are going to be there, walk that property so that you understand what is there, removing loose things, locking dumpsters. In Portland, sometimes we have people that will pre-survey the places they want to protest and pre-stage things that they want to use later, signs, things to throw. So starting your physical security review early gets you understanding what's in place on your property. Operationally, make sure your staff knows what's going on for this event. I cannot stress communication enough. Everyone, it's always the piece that breaks down when something happens a little bit. Know what the plan is, know that your staff knows what the plan is, and more importantly, your expectation of their roles in the event. Not everyone is going to be comfortable walking up to a protester and removing them from the property. So make sure everybody knows what their role is. And you may consider registration and ID checks for your events as a way to control the operational aspect in terms of who's getting in. For security, every situation you're going to need to sort of sit back and say, do we need to change our security presence for this particular event? Be prepared to call 911 if you feel unsafe or there's illegal activity. Identify ahead of time who is going to make the decision to do that. Be prepared for a potential dismissal or evacuation. It goes back to that communication piece. How are you going to announce that? How are you going to message that to the greater community? General protest preparedness, working with attendees not to engage with protesters. People might have to walk right by them. How can you make sure that that path is safe for them? We want to avoid escalation. Again, planning with your staff. If you are anticipating potentially that protesters are going to come on your property or try to infiltrate your event, know what the law enforcement will respond to. Meet with law enforcement, find out what activity they're willing to arrest on. I would also say know your property boundaries. If your property is private property, then they have no expectation of being allowed there. When you remove them from a property or escort them off, know where that line is, know where it is legal for protesters to be, to have their First Amendment rights, and where your private property line is, so that past that, you have an understanding of where that line is for when you can call the police. Lastly, it's hard to keep emotions in check in these scenarios, but the more matter of fact you can be when dealing with protesters, the better the situation is likely to turn out.
Jessica, thank you very much. We got a few moments left, but one very important question, that fourth question that I posed right at the beginning. Stephanie, let's not forget about our cyber issues. One of the most asked questions since October 7th, how should we advertise an event? Should it be on an open site? What suggestions can you provide very briefly? And we will be passing that out and happy to answer these questions. But what should organizations do to advertise safely?
All right, no pressure. Cybersecurity is this huge, broad stroke here, so I'm going to narrow it down. But we need to treat cybersecurity like any other security measure. And I think it's one of the things we sometimes leave out because we're either afraid of it or we don't understand it. Okay, I want to start by saying work with your IT specialist. They'll not only help you save a lot of time, but they're going to provide a reality check on the various security risks involved. It's true regardless of the size and whether it's online or whether it's an in-person event. If you're planning a virtual event, tons of stuff online on how you can secure it, to include using that multi-factor authentication. I like the two-factor authentication. So even if a hacker knows your username and password, they can't log into your account without that second criteria. And then also, I think look at what kind of lens are we using. I think when it comes to our events and even our websites, we don't think about the unexpected audience, which is the bad actors. We're looking more at the content or the event that we're trying to advertise. So rather than looking through that lens, I want you to start looking at content through a security and privacy lens. Look at it as a separate piece, and through that lens, ask, is there any information we're adding here that we don't really need? Can I pull it back? Can I water it down? And an example of that, maybe we decide we don't need to list the time and location of the event in that invite. It's only for maybe a certain audience, or if it's a broader audience, they have to do online. So online registration, and we vet them first before we hand out that information, giving details to our events, right? Additionally, and equally important, this is a good time to advertise if the in-person event is going to have heightened security, such as bag checks, or say no umbrellas are allowed. It's a good time to advertise this because it allows people to be prepared as well. Some states have concealed carry permits. If you're not letting weapons in, that's a good time to let people know. As an example, I was a security director, like Brad said, in Miami, and we hosted an outdoor event with 2,000 people. The weather in Miami is very unpredictable, right? Rain can come at any minute. I did not allow umbrellas part of my safety security. And people are like, how can you do that? Well, for one thing, I can't see 2,000 people walking around not poking each other with an umbrella. For another thing, security can't see into the area that they're surveilling. So what we did was we came up with a compromise, right? We collected umbrellas at the front and we handed out ponchos, and people were okay with that. So I want you to kind of think sometimes outside the box. These conversations have to be started early. They have to focus on thinking through the details of your security measures, all the contacts you need to make before you advertise an event. And that's really to echo Captain Jensen. You need to coordinate with local law enforcement regarding your events. And we provide a ton of free resources that we can help you with, and we can even make referrals if you're hiring private security. Last thing, people complain all the time that security is restrictive. I want you to remember, you're always trading convenience for security. So keep that in mind. The more convenient something is, the less secure it tends to be. Stay vigilant, and remember, it takes a village to protect a village. Brad?
Stephanie, thank you. George, final words, sir, from the ADL.
Thank you. My first thought is I'm never taking an umbrella to an event that Stephanie's in charge of. But other than that, two final thoughts. Again, let me echo the thanks from team at ADL for being part of this conversation today. You know, a lot of folks on this call work and partner with ADL across the country. ADL has kind of two business lines. One is being on the front lines of fighting anti-Semitism, and two, to the spirit of this call, is in the partnership business. Many Federation security directors and federations across the country partner with ADL on a range of different efforts across the country: safety, security, anti-Semitism, fighting all forms of bias and bigotry online and off. And the theme that I want to echo here today is that we're your partners in this effort. In the same way where we partner on the national messaging that Brad alluded to, on threats from both state and non-state actors, both domestically and internationally, we're your partners here, to the point that Stephanie made, which I can't echo enough here, which is it takes a village. We're all, anyone in the public safety or security business is really in the partnership business to some degree, whether that's with other advocacy or nonprofit organizations or with law enforcement. We appreciate the opportunity to partner with you here nationally and also in cities and states across the country. Brad and Team SCN, thanks for the opportunity to join you today.
George, thank you very much. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Abigail. Just 2 points. One, if you need help from us, reach out to us. We have a 24-hour access. Please use the resources you have available. With that, thank you all. Abigail.
Thank you, Brad. And I also want to just thank everyone who has been a participant, attendee, and a panelist for this webinar, including Brad for leading this, and Carrie Sleeper earlier for also leading our panel. I wanted to share the screen so that way, just outlining all the directories of our security initiatives that is nationwide. And so these resources are ones that you can connect with, and specifically the materials that we mentioned today, we will be giving those out in linked form with our follow-up email within 24 hours of the close of this webinar. For connecting with us, you can reach out to 844-726-3375, or sending an email over to our duty desk at securecommunitynetwork.org. We also mentioned the incident reporting form that is available on our website, including the websites of our Federation partners. You can access it by the link below, but always remember, in the case of an incident, to always dial 911. For training needs, we also have a contact available for you at training@securecommunitynetwork.org. So please feel free to reach out with any questions, with any incident reporting, and building those connections before they are needed in an incident. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We look forward to hosting more webinars and providing more resources as always. Have a safe and happy Passover. Thank you.